The dust swirled like golden specters across the parched Wyoming landscape, as Zora Matthews clutched her swollen belly and stumbled toward the weathered church on the edge of Redemption Springs. Blood trickled down her inner thigh, a terrifying omen that her time had come too soon, 9 months too soon after Thomas Willoughby had left her with nothing but empty promises and a growing child inside her womb. It was 1878, and the West was unforgiving to many, but especially to women like Zora, women who had trusted, women who had loved unwisely, women who now carried the visible evidence of their sin. "Please," she whispered to no one, her breath ragged as another contraction seized her body. The small town of Redemption Springs had already turned its back on her, the whispers following her like shadows. Jezebel, they called her. Fallen woman. The church door was locked when she reached it, and Reverend Whitmore had made it clear that she was no longer welcome among his flock. The pain came again, stronger this time, driving her to her knees in the dirt. "God help me," she sobbed, pressing her forehead against the rough wooden door of the church. "I reckon God might be occupied elsewhere, madam, but I'm here if that'll do." The deep voice startled her. Zora turned to see a tall figure silhouetted against the setting sun. As he stepped closer, she could make out the details of him: broad shoulders beneath a worn leather vest, a weathered face partially obscured by several days' growth of beard, and eyes the color of a summer storm. "I don't need charity," Zora managed, though her body betrayed her as another contraction racked her frame. "Didn't offer charity," the stranger replied, kneeling beside her. "Offered help. Name's Gabriel Blackwood. Most folks call me Gabe." A groan escaped her lips as the pain intensified. "I'm having a baby." "I can see that," Gabe said, his voice surprisingly gentle for such a rugged man. "And it seems that baby's coming whether this town approves or not." Without hesitation, he scooped Zora into his arms. She was too weak to protest as he carried her to his horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion waiting patiently nearby. "My cabin's not far," he said, mounting behind her and cradling her against his chest. "Hang on, madam." "Zora," she whispered. "Zora Matthews." "Hang on, Miss Zora Matthews," he amended. "This might be a bumpy ride." The journey to Gabe's cabin was mercifully short, though each step of the horse sent waves of agony through Zora's body. By the time they reached the small but sturdy structure nestled against a stand of ponderosa pines, Zora's dress was soaked with sweat, and her face pale as milk. Gabe's cabin was simple but clean, with a stone fireplace and a narrow bed pushed against one wall. He laid her gently on the bed and moved with surprising efficiency, stoking the fire and putting water on to boil. "You've done this before," Zora gasped between contractions. "Delivered my share of foals and calves," Gabe replied, his back to her as he gathered clean cloths. "Can't imagine it's too different." Despite her pain, Zora managed a weak laugh. "I'm not a mare, Mr. Blackwood." He turned to her, a half-smile softening his weathered features. "No, madam, you certainly are not." The next hours passed in a blur of pain for Zora. Gabe proved to be both capable and gentle, wiping her brow with cool cloths and murmuring encouragement as she labored. When the moment finally came, he positioned himself at the end of the bed, his sleeves rolled up and his expression determined. "Push now, Zora," he commanded, all formality forgotten in the intensity of the moment. With a cry that seemed to tear from the depths of her soul, Zora pushed. And then, miraculously, a new cry filled the cabin, thin and angry and perfect. "You've got yourself a daughter," Gabe announced, his voice thick with emotion as he held up the tiny, squirming infant. "A beautiful little girl." Tears streamed down Zora's face as Gabe laid the swaddled newborn in her arms. The baby's face was red and wrinkled, her wisps of dark hair plastered to her head, but to Zora, she was the most beautiful sight in all creation. "Hello, my love," she whispered, pressing her lips to her daughter's forehead. Outside, the wind had picked up, carrying with it the first bite of autumn chill. Gabe moved to the window, drawing the rough curtains closed against the night. "Storm's coming," he observed, glancing back at the woman and child on his bed. "You're welcome to stay until it passes." Zora looked up, the reality of her situation crashing back upon her. She had no home to return to, no family to take her in. The room she had rented above the milliner's shop had been taken from her when her condition became obvious, and the little money she had saved from her work as a seamstress was nearly gone. "I don't know where I'll go," she admitted, her voice small. Gabe crossed to the fireplace, stoking the flames higher. "That's a worry for another day," he said firmly. "Tonight, you and your little one rest. Tomorrow will take care of itself." As if to punctuate his words, the baby began to fuss. Zora adjusted her clothing with trembling hands to nurse her daughter for the first time. Gabe kept his back turned, giving her privacy. "She'll need a name," he said after a moment. Zora gazed down at her nursing child, overwhelmed by love so fierce it stole her breath. "Hope," she decided. "Her name is Hope." "Hope," Gabe repeated, as if testing the weight of the word. "It suits her." As the night deepened and the storm battered the small cabin, Gabe made a pallet for himself on the floor, insisting that Zora and Hope take the bed. Despite her exhaustion, Zora found sleep elusive, her mind racing with fears for the future. "Mr. Blackwood," she whispered into the darkness. "Gabe," he corrected, his voice indicating he was as awake as she. "Gabe, thank you for everything." There was a pause before he replied. "Get some rest, Zora, you're safe here." And for the first time in months, Zora felt that perhaps she was. Morning arrived with pale sunlight filtering through the curtains. Zora woke to find the cabin empty save for her and Hope, who slept peacefully beside her. A note on the table informed her that Gabe had gone to tend his horses and would return with breakfast. True to his word, he returned an hour later, his arms laden with fresh eggs and a jar of milk. "Borrowed these from my neighbor," he explained, setting to work at the small cookstove. "Mrs. Hollister keeps chickens and a milk cow. She's a good sort, doesn't hold with town gossip." Zora sat up carefully, cradling Hope against her chest. "I can't keep imposing on your kindness," she said. "We need to find our own way." Gabe cracked eggs into a pan with practiced ease. "And where exactly do you plan to go?" I don't know," Zora admitted, "but I can work. I'm a skilled seamstress." "Redemption Springs hasn't exactly shown itself to be charitable," Gabe pointed out, sliding a plate of eggs toward her. "Eat. You need your strength." Zora couldn't argue with that. She ate hungrily, suddenly aware of how famished she was after the ordeal of childbirth. "There's a larger settlement about 30 miles west," Gabe said as he took a seat across from her. "Silver Creek. I ride there sometimes for supplies. Folks there might be more accepting." Hope began to fuss and Zora adjusted her to nurse again. "Do you know anyone there?" she asked. "A few." "The blacksmith owes me a favor. He might know of work." Zora studied him over the top of Hope's head. "Why are you helping me, Mr. Blackwood? You don't know me." Gabe's gaze dropped to his plate. "I know what it's like to be judged unfairly," he said after a moment. "And I know what it's like to be alone when you need someone most." Something in his voice told Zora there was more to the story, but she didn't press. They finished their meal in companionable silence, broken only by Hope's occasional coos. Later, as Gabe showed Zora around the small property, she was struck by the peace of the place. The cabin sat on a gentle rise, overlooking a small creek that wound through a meadow dotted with wildflowers. A corral held 3 horses, the chestnut stallion she had ridden the previous day, a dappled mare, and a spirited-looking colt. "It's beautiful here," Zora said, breathing in the clean mountain air. "It suits me," Gabe replied, his gaze sweeping over the land with quiet pride. "I've been here 5 years now, built the cabin myself. You live alone?" Something flickered across his face, a shadow of old pain quickly masked. "Just me and the horses," he confirmed. Hope squirmed in Zora's arms, her tiny face scrunching up in preparation for a cry. Gabe surprised her by reaching out. "May I?" he asked. Hesitantly, Zora placed her daughter in his large, calloused hands. The contrast was striking, the tiny infant cradled by the rugged cowboy. But Gabe held Hope with natural ease, tucking her against his chest and swaying gently. "You're good with her," Zora observed. Gabe's expression softened as he looked down at the baby. "Had a sister once," he said quietly. "She had 2 little ones before fever took her. I helped where I could." Zora's heart ached at the loss she heard in his voice. "I'm sorry." He nodded acknowledgement but didn't elaborate. Instead, he returned Hope to her arms and gestured toward a small structure behind the cabin. "I've got a workshop out back. Make furniture sometimes when ranching work is slow. Thought I might put together a cradle for the little one. If you're staying, that is." The offer hung in the air between them, not just a cradle but a temporary sanctuary. "We shouldn't impose," Zora began, but Gabe cut her off with a shake of his head. "Winter's coming, Zora. You need time to heal, and that little one needs a warm place to grow. Stay until spring. By then, you'll be stronger and we can talk about Silver Creek again." His logic was sound, and Zora found herself without a counterargument. The thought of facing the world alone with a newborn as winter descended was terrifying. "All right," she agreed finally. "Until spring." Gabe nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Until spring," he echoed. The following days established a rhythm to their shared existence. Gabe rose early to tend the horses and check his small herd of cattle that grazed on the surrounding land. Zora, still recovering from childbirth, managed the cabin, cooking simple meals and keeping the fire stocked with wood that Gabe chopped and stacked against the coming cold. True to his word, Gabe fashioned a beautiful cradle from pine, its edges sanded smooth and its rockers perfectly balanced. He placed it near the fireplace where it would catch the warmth, and Zora found herself moved to tears by the simple kindness of the gesture. "It's perfect," she told him, running her fingers over the polished wood. "Thank you." Gabe ducked his head, seemingly embarrassed by her gratitude. "It's just wood and nails," he demurred, but Zora could see the pride in his eyes. As October deepened into November, the first snow dusted the mountains surrounding Gabe's homestead. The world outside the cabin grew hushed and white, and inside, the 3 of them created a semblance of family that surprised them both. Zora discovered that Gabe was a man of few words but deeply thoughtful actions. He never questioned her about Hope's father or the circumstances that had left her alone and desperate. Instead, he simply made space for her and her daughter in his life, adjusting his routines to accommodate their presence. For his part, Gabe found himself looking forward to returning to the cabin each evening. What had once been a silent refuge now echoed with Zora's humming as she moved about the kitchen, or the surprisingly pleasant sound of Hope's babbling cries. The loneliness that had been his constant companion for years began to recede, replaced by something warmer and more hopeful. One evening, as snow fell heavily outside, Gabe returned from checking on a pregnant heifer to find Zora seated by the fire, Hope sleeping peacefully in her cradle. Zora was mending one of his shirts, her needle flashing in the firelight. "You don't have to do that," he said, hanging his snow-dusted coat on a peg by the door. Zora looked up with a smile that transformed her face, making her look younger and less careworn. "I don't mind. It's the least I can do to earn our keep." Gabe crossed to the fire, holding his hands out to the warmth. "You don't need to earn your keep, Zora. This isn't that kind of arrangement." She set the mending aside, her expression turning serious. "What kind of arrangement is it, then?" The question hung between them, laden with unspoken possibilities. Gabe considered his words carefully. "It's friendship," he said finally. "2 people helping each other through a hard winter." Zora nodded slowly, though something in her eyes suggested she wasn't entirely satisfied with his answer. "Friends, then." "Friends," Gabe confirmed, though even as he said it, he recognized the inadequacy of the word to describe the complex emotions taking root in his heart. Later that night, after Zora had retired to the small bedroom that Gabe had insisted she take for herself and Hope, he sat alone by the dying fire, contemplating the strange turn his life had taken. He had lived alone for so long, had convinced himself that solitude was his natural state. Now, the thought of the cabin returning to its former emptiness in the spring left him with an ache in his chest that no amount of rationalization could ease. "It's for the best," he murmured to himself, poking at the embers. "She deserves better than an old cowboy with nothing to offer but a run-down cabin and too many secrets." But even as he said the words, Gabe knew they were a lie. In the short time Zora and Hope had been with him, they had become as essential to him as breathing. The idea of losing them was becoming unbearable. The weeks passed, and Christmas approached. Gabe made infrequent trips to Redemption Springs for supplies, always returning with not just necessities, but small treats: peppermint sticks, a length of bright ribbon, a tiny wooden horse he had whittled for Hope during the long evenings by the fire. Zora watched these offerings accumulate and felt a growing warmth toward the taciturn cowboy, who seemed determined to make their temporary home as comfortable as possible. She found herself studying him when he wasn't looking, the way his hands, so large and capable, could be incredibly gentle when handling Hope, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, the way he hummed tunelessly to himself when lost in thought. One afternoon, while Hope napped, Zora asked the question that had been on her mind for weeks. "Why do you live so far from town, Gabe? A man like you. I would think you'd want company sometimes." Gabe was cleaning his rifle at the table, his movements methodical and practiced. He didn't look up as he answered. "Towns have memories, and people who don't forget." Zora waited, sensing there was more to the story. Finally, Gabe set the rifle aside and met her gaze. "I killed a man once," he said quietly, "in Redemption Springs 10 years ago." Zora felt her breath catch, but she didn't flinch from his confession. Was it self-defense? A flicker of surprise crossed Gabe's face, as if he had expected a different reaction. "Yes," he said after a moment. "He was drunk, threatening a young woman outside the saloon. I stepped in and he pulled a knife. I had no choice." "Then why do you speak of it as if it were a sin?" Zora asked gently, Gabe's hands curled into fists on the table. "Because the man was the mayor's son, and in the eyes of Redemption Springs, I'm still a murderer, no matter the circumstances." Understanding dawned. "That's why you knew they wouldn't help me," Zora said, "because they had already judged you just as they judged me." Gabe nodded, his expression grim. "Small towns have long memories and little forgiveness." Zora reached across the table, covering one of his fists with her hand. "Then they are fools," she said firmly, "because the man I've come to know these past months is kind and honorable and good." His eyes met hers, filled with a vulnerability that made her heart ache. "You truly believe that?" "I do," Zora said, and was surprised to realize how completely she meant it. "You saved us, Gabe, without asking for anything in return. How could I see you as anything but good?" Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition, perhaps, of the foundation being laid for feelings deeper than friendship. Gabe turned his hand beneath hers, their fingers intertwining briefly before he pulled away, the moment broken by Hope's waking cries from the bedroom. As Zora rose to tend to her daughter, she felt Gabe's gaze follow her, weighted with unspoken emotions that matched the ones stirring in her own heart. Christmas Eve arrived with a fresh blanket of snow and a sky so clear the stars seemed close enough to touch. Gabe had been mysteriously absent for much of the day, returning just as dusk fell with pine boughs and berries for decorating the cabin. Together, they transformed the simple space into something festive: greenery draped over the mantel, berries strung in bright garlands, candles placed in the windows to cast a welcoming glow. "It's beautiful," Zora said, cradling Hope as they admired their handiwork. "I haven't celebrated Christmas properly in years." "Nor I," Gabe admitted. "Didn't see much point alone." Zora looked at him thoughtfully. "But you're not alone this year." Their eyes met and something electric passed between them. "No," Gabe agreed softly. "I'm not alone this year." He disappeared into his workshop after supper, returning with 2 carefully wrapped packages. "It's not much," he said almost shyly, placing them on the table, "but I wanted you to have something to open tomorrow morning." Zora was touched beyond words. "I have something for you too," she confessed, retrieving a package from beneath her bed. "Though it's even less than not much." Gabe took the package with reverent hands. "You didn't need to give me anything, Zora. Having you and Hope here, that's gift enough." The sincerity in his voice made her throat tighten with emotion. "Nevertheless," she managed. "Happy Christmas, Gabe. Happy Christmas, Zora." They sat before the fire long into the night, talking softly as Hope slept in her cradle. Gabe spoke of his childhood in Missouri, of coming west after the war with nothing but a horse and the clothes on his back. Zora told him of her own past, of losing her parents to influenza when she was 16, of making her way as a seamstress, of meeting Thomas Willoughby when he passed through Redemption Springs with a cattle drive. "He promised to come back for me," she said, her voice hollow with the memory of betrayal. "Said he'd send for me once he reached California." I believed him. Gabe's jaw tightened. "Some men don't deserve the trust they're given." "No," Zora agreed softly, "but some do." Their gazes held, and Zora felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire. She looked away first, suddenly aware of how alone they were, how intimate the cabin felt with the snow falling outside and the fire crackling between them. "It's late," she said, rising from her chair. "I should check on Hope." Gabe stood as well, towering over her in the firelight. "Zora," he began, his voice rough with emotion. She looked up at him, her heart pounding in her chest. Yes, for a moment, it seemed he might reach for her, might pull her into his arms. Instead, he stepped back, his expression closing off. "Sleep well," he said, turning toward his pallet by the fire, disappointed but unsure why. Zora retreated to the bedroom, closing the door softly behind her. Christmas morning dawned bright and cold. Zora woke to find Hope already being tended to by Gabe, who sat in the rocking chair by the fire, feeding the baby from a bottle of goat's milk while speaking to her in low, serious tones. "And that's why a good horse is better than gold, little Hope. Remember that when you're older." The sight of the rugged cowboy cradling her daughter with such tender care made Zora's heart swell with affection. She watched them silently from the bedroom doorway, reluctant to interrupt the moment. As if sensing her presence, Gabe looked up, a smile spreading across his face that transformed his features. "Merry Christmas," he greeted her. "This little lady was making her presence known, and I thought you might want to sleep a bit longer." "Thank you," Zora said, joining them by the fire. "You're good with her. She makes it easy," Gabe replied, looking down at Hope with unmistakable fondness. "Smart as a whip, this one. Takes after her mother, I'd wager." The casual compliment warmed Zora more than the fire. "Shall we open our gifts?" she suggested, gesturing to the packages on the table. Gabe nodded, carefully transferring Hope to Zora's arms. "Ladies first." Zora settled into the chair with Hope and opened the first package to reveal a beautiful shawl, soft wool dyed a deep blue. "Oh, Gabe," she breathed, running her fingers over the fine material. "It's lovely. Thought it matched your eyes," Gabe said, a flush creeping up his neck. "There's one more." The second package contained a tiny dress for Hope, made of soft flannel with delicate embroidery around the collar. "Did you make this?" Zora asked, astonished. Gabe shook his head. "Mrs. Hollister helped, said every baby needs a proper Christmas dress." Tears pricked at Zora's eyes. The thoughtfulness of the gifts overwhelmed her. "Thank you," she whispered. "Now yours." Gabe unwrapped the package she had given him with careful hands. Inside was a hand-knitted scarf in a deep forest green. "I made it while you were out with the cattle," Zora explained. "It's not as fine as what you're used to, I'm sure, but it's perfect," Gabe interrupted, wrapping the scarf around his neck. "No one has made anything for me since my mother passed. This means more than you know, Zora." The naked emotion in his voice struck her to the core. Without thinking, she reached out to touch his cheek, her fingers light against his skin. "You deserve kindness, Gabe, more than you allow yourself to believe." He captured her hand in his, holding it against his face for a moment before releasing it. "As do you, Zora Matthews, as do you." The day passed in a haze of simple pleasures, a special breakfast of johnny cakes and preserves, Hope cooing in her new dress, stories shared by the fire as the snow continued to fall outside. By evening, Zora felt more content than she had in years, possibly ever. After Hope was settled in her cradle for the night, Zora found Gabe standing on the porch, staring up at the stars that had emerged as the clouds cleared. She joined him, pulling her new shawl tight around her shoulders against the cold. "Beautiful night," she observed, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Gabe agreed, his gaze still fixed on the heavens. They stood in companionable silence for a moment before Gabe spoke again. "I've been thinking about spring," he said, his voice carefully neutral. Zora's heart sank. Of course spring, when she and Hope would leave as agreed. "Oh," she managed. "I was wondering if maybe you'd reconsider," he continued, finally looking at her. "About leaving, that is." Hope flared in Zora's chest, but she tempered it with caution. "What are you suggesting, Gabe?" He turned to face her fully, his expression earnest in the starlight. "I'm suggesting that you and Hope stay, not as guests, as family." "Family," Zora repeated, the word both wonderful and insufficient for what she had begun to feel for him. Gabe took a deep breath as if gathering his courage. "I know it's not been long, and I know you might not feel the same, but these past months with you and Hope, they've been the happiest of my life. The thought of this cabin without you in it, I can't bear it, Zora." Tears filled her eyes, blurring the stars above them. "Is this a proposal, Gabriel Blackwood?" she asked, her voice trembling. He stepped closer, his hands coming to rest lightly on her shoulders. "It is," he confirmed. "A proper one. I'm asking you to be my wife, Zora. To let me be a father to Hope, to build a life here together." Zora searched his face, finding nothing there but sincerity and the reflection of her own growing love. "People will talk," she warned. "They'll say you married a fallen woman, that Hope isn't yours." Gabe's expression hardened. "Let them talk. Hope will be mine in every way that matters, and you." His voice softened, his hands sliding up to frame her face. "You are the most honorable, brave, beautiful woman I've ever known. Any man would be proud to call you wife." The last of Zora's reservations melted away. "Then yes," she whispered. "Yes, Gabe, I'll marry you." His smile was like the dawn breaking. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he lowered his mouth to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, a question rather than a demand. When Zora's arms wound around his neck, drawing him closer, the kiss deepened, becoming a promise of all that awaited them. When they finally parted, breathless and laughing in the cold night air, Gabe pressed his forehead to hers. "I never thought to find love again," he confessed. "Had resigned myself to being alone." "As had I," Zora admitted. "After Thomas, I believed that was all I deserved." Gabe's arms tightened around her. "You deserve everything good in this world, Zora, and I intend to spend the rest of my days trying to give it to you." They were married on New Year's Day, 1879, in Mrs. Hollister's front parlor. The elderly widow had insisted on hosting, declaring that every bride deserved flowers and cake, even in the dead of winter. She had filled her house with pine cones and ribbons, and somehow produced a fruitcake that she swore was almost as good as summer wedding cake. Zora wore her blue shawl over her best dress, and Hope, now almost 3 months old, was resplendent in the Christmas dress Gabe had given her. Gabe himself had ridden all the way to Silver Creek to find a proper suit, and stood tall and proud as he pledged his life to Zora and her daughter. The ceremony was small, just Mrs. Hollister, her grown son who served as witness, and a circuit preacher who had stopped to shelter from the winter weather. But to Zora it was perfect. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the preacher declared, closing his Bible with a smile. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. Blackwood." Gabe's kiss was tender and reverent, a silent vow to cherish her always. When they parted, he surprised her by lifting Hope from Mrs. Hollister's arms and holding her between them. "And I take you as my daughter," he said solemnly to the infant, who gurgled happily and grabbed at his beard. "From this day forward, you are Hope Blackwood, and I am your pa." Tears spilled down Zora's cheeks at the beautiful simplicity of the moment. Mrs. Hollister sniffled loudly into her handkerchief, declaring it the most romantic thing I've ever witnessed, and I've read plenty of penny dreadfuls. They returned to the cabin that evening as husband and wife, the three of them now officially a family. Gabe carried Zora over the threshold despite her laughing protests, setting her gently on her feet before the fire. "Welcome home, Mrs. Blackwood," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I've been home for months," Zora replied softly, rising on tiptoe to kiss him again. "I just didn't know it yet." Spring arrived in a riot of wildflowers that carpeted the meadow surrounding the cabin. Hope, now 7 months old, was sitting up on her own and babbling constantly, her dark eyes so like her mother's, taking in everything with keen interest. Gabe had expanded the cabin during the winter months, adding a proper bedroom for himself and Zora and a small nursery for Hope. He spoke of further improvements, a larger kitchen, perhaps, and a garden plot where Zora could grow vegetables and flowers. "You're building an empire," Zora teased him one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. "Just a home," Gabe corrected, his arm around her shoulders. "A place where our children can grow up safe and loved." "Children," Zora echoed, a smile playing at her lips. "Plural," Gabe looked suddenly uncertain. "If you want, I thought perhaps. That is, if you're willing." Zora took his hand and placed it on her stomach, still flat, but harboring a secret she had been saving for the right moment. "As it happens, Mr. Blackwood, we're already expecting our second." The joy that transformed Gabe's face was something Zora knew she would remember until her dying day. He swept her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of the most precious glass. "When?" he asked, his voice choked with emotion. "November, Dr. Phillips says, just in time for our first anniversary." Gabe buried his face in her hair, and Zora felt the wetness of tears against her neck. "Thank you," he whispered, "for giving me this life I never dreamed I could have." "We gave it to each other," Zora corrected gently, lifting his face to meet her gaze. "Both of us were lost in our own ways, both judged unfairly by a world too quick to condemn, but we found each other, Gabe. And in finding each other, we found home." As if to punctuate her words, Hope's delighted squeal carried from inside the cabin where she was discovering the joy of banging wooden spoons against pots. Gabe laughed, the sound rich and free. "I'd better rescue those pots before she dents them beyond recognition." Zora caught his hand as he rose. "I love you, Gabriel Blackwood," she said simply. "With all that I am." His expression softened, and he bent to kiss her with a tenderness that still made her heart race. "And I love you, Zora Blackwood, until the stars fall from the sky." Together, they went inside to their daughter, closing the door on the gathering dusk and embracing the warmth of the home they had built from the ashes of their separate sorrows. The summer brought changes to the Blackwood homestead. Gabe's small herd of cattle had grown, necessitating the hiring of a ranch hand, a quiet young man named Jesse who was grateful for honest work, and asked no questions about the family that employed him. Zora's pregnancy progressed, her body rounding with new life as Hope took her first tottering steps across the cabin floor. Word had spread through the surrounding homesteads about the skilled seamstress living at the Blackwood place, and Zora found herself with a steady stream of work, mending, alterations, and occasionally a special project like a wedding dress or christening gown. The extra income allowed them to make improvements to the property that might otherwise have waited years. "You're building yourself quite a reputation," Gabe observed one evening as Zora finished embroidering the hem of a dress for the banker's daughter in Silver Creek. "Soon you'll be too busy for the likes of me." Zora set aside her needle and thread, stretching her back which ached from the combination of pregnancy and hours of detailed work. "Never," she assured him, accepting his offered hands to help her rise from her chair. "You and the children will always come first." Gabe pulled her gently against him, his hands cradling her swollen belly. "How are you feeling today?" he asked, his brow furrowed with concern. "You looked tired at breakfast." "I'm fine," Zora assured him, though in truth, this pregnancy seemed more taxing than her first had been. Just eager to meet this little one, Gabe pressed a kiss to her forehead. 3 more months, he reminded her. Though I've been thinking we should ride to Silver Creek soon, stay with my friend John for a week or so before your time comes. Be closer to the doctor, just in case. The suggestion was reasonable, but Zora felt a flutter of anxiety at the thought of leaving their home, of facing the judgment that might await her in a larger settlement. "Do you think that's necessary?" she asked. "Hope was born right here with no doctor at all." "And it nearly killed you both," Gabe reminded her gently. "I don't want to take chances with your life, Zora, or the baby's," she sighed, knowing he was right. "All right," she conceded. "But not yet. Let's wait until October at least. I want Hope to have her first birthday here in her home." Gabe's expression softened. "Of course. We'll wait until after her birthday." Hope's first birthday in late September was a joyous occasion. Mrs. Hollister made the journey to the Blackwood homestead, bringing with her a small cake and a hand-knitted blanket for the baby. Jessie, their ranch hand, carved a set of wooden animals for Hope, who immediately set about trying to fit them in her mouth. Gabe's gift to his daughter was a tiny rocking horse, lovingly crafted in his workshop over the course of several months. Hope's squeal of delight when she saw it made all the secret hours of work worthwhile. "She's the image of you," Mrs. Hollister told Zora as they watched Hope bounce gleefully on her new horse, Gabe's steadying hand on her back. "Got your eyes and your spirit." Zora smiled, her hand unconsciously moving to her rounded belly. "I see Gabe in her too, though, in the way she studies everything, so serious sometimes, and that stubborn little chin that's all Blackwood determination." Mrs. Hollister's eyes twinkled. "It's a fine thing, seeing a family so well-matched. Some might say it was meant to be." Meant to be. The phrase echoed in Zora's mind that night as she lay beside Gabe, his arm draped protectively over her waist, his hand spread wide over their unborn child. Was it fate that had brought her to the steps of the church that day, in her hour of greatest need? Or simple chance that Gabe had been passing by? Whatever forces had aligned to bring them together, Zora could only be grateful. From the darkest moment of her life had come this, a love deeper and truer than she had ever imagined possible. "What are you thinking about so hard?" Gabe murmured, his voice thick with approaching sleep. Zora turned in his arms, pressing a kiss to his chest. "About how lucky I am," she answered honestly. "How lucky we all are." Gabe's arms tightened around her. "Not luck," he corrected softly. "Blessing." The journey to Silver Creek in mid-October was undertaken with great care. Gabe insisted on bringing the wagon rather than having Zora ride horseback, and he filled it with blankets and pillows to cushion her from the rough trail. Hope, now accomplished at walking short distances, was nonetheless confined to the wagon for safety, a situation she protested with impressive volume. "She has your lungs," Gabe observed wryly after a particularly spirited outburst. Zora laughed, bouncing Hope on her knee to distract her. "And your stubbornness, a formidable combination." They made the journey in 2 days, stopping overnight at a way station where the proprietor's wife fussed over Zora and pronounced that the new baby would be a strapping boy, mark my words. Zora accepted the prediction with a smile, though privately she suspected another daughter. Something about the way this child moved reminded her of Hope's prenatal acrobatics. Silver Creek proved to be a bustling settlement, larger and more prosperous than Redemption Springs. The main street boasted a proper hotel, a bank, and several stores, including a millinery where Zora noted with professional interest the latest fashions displayed in the window. Gabe's friend John Mercer was the town blacksmith, a barrel-chested man with a booming laugh who welcomed them with genuine warmth. His wife, Sarah, was equally welcoming, showing Zora to a comfortable bedroom in their home above the smithy. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need," Sarah assured her, helping to settle Hope in a borrowed cradle. "John speaks very highly of your husband, says he's the finest horseman in 3 territories." "That sounds like Gabe," Zora agreed with a smile. though he'd never say so himself. "Modest men are rare treasures," Sarah said with a knowing nod. "Hold on to that one." "I intend to," Zora replied, her hand moving instinctively to her wedding ring. The following days were pleasant, if strange, after the solitude of their homestead. Zora found herself enjoying the company of other women, particularly Sarah, who introduced her to several members of the local sewing circle. To Zora's relief, no one seemed to question her relationship with Gabe or the fact that Hope was nearly a year old while their marriage was not yet that. "People here mind their own business for the most part," Sarah explained when Zora cautiously broached the subject. "Half the women in this town have stories they'd rather not share. The West is a place for second chances." The words lifted a weight from Zora's shoulders that she hadn't fully realized she was carrying. The fear of judgment, of whispers behind her back, had been a constant companion since learning of her pregnancy with Hope. To be accepted without question was a gift she hadn't expected. Dr. Phillips, the town physician, examined Zora and pronounced her in excellent health, though he agreed with Gabe that remaining in Silver Creek until the birth was the wisest course. "Especially with winter coming on," he added. "Those mountain trails can become impassable overnight with the first heavy snow." So it was decided. They would remain in Silver Creek through the birth and the early weeks of recovery, returning to their homestead in the spring. Jesse had been instructed to care for the property in their absence, and Mrs. Hollister had promised to check on him periodically. Gabe found work helping John at the smithy, his knowledge of horses proving valuable when it came to shoeing the more temperamental animals brought in. Zora, despite her advanced pregnancy, took on small sewing projects, her skilled needlework quickly earning her a reputation among the ladies of Silver Creek. "You could open a shop here," Sarah suggested one afternoon as they watched Hope and Sarah's youngest son playing in the small yard behind the smithy. "There's a vacant space next to the apothecary. John and Gabe could build you a counter and shelves." The idea was tempting. As much as Zora loved their homestead, she had to admit that the isolation sometimes weighed on her. Having other women to talk with, access to a school for Hope when she was older, the convenience of shops and services, these were advantages that couldn't be dismissed lightly. "I'll speak to Gabe about it," she promised, though she suspected she knew what his answer would be. Gabe was a man of the open country, more at home under the vast sky than within the confines of a town. That evening, as they prepared for bed in the small room the Mercers had given them, Zora broached the subject. "Sarah thinks I could open a dress shop here," she said, brushing her hair at the small vanity. "Says there's demand for quality work." Gabe, who had been checking on Hope in her cradle, looked up with surprise. "Here, in Silver Creek," Zora nodded, watching his reflection in the mirror. "It would mean living in town, at least part of the time." Gabe was silent for a long moment, his expression thoughtful rather than dismissive. "Would that make you happy?" he asked finally. Living in town, the question caught Zora off guard. She had expected resistance, perhaps even outright refusal. I don't know," she admitted. "There are advantages, certainly, for Hope especially as she grows." Gabe crossed to stand behind her, his hands coming to rest on her shoulders. "And for you," he pressed gently. "Would it make you happy having other women to talk to, having your own shop?" Zora met his gaze in the mirror. "I'm happy with you," she said truthfully, "wherever we are. But yes, sometimes I miss conversation, female companionship." Gabe nodded slowly, his thumbs moving in small circles at the base of her neck. "Then we'll consider it," he said simply. "Perhaps not moving to town entirely, but we could look for a place closer to Silver Creek. Close enough to ride in regularly." Zora turned on the stool to face him, taking his hands in hers. "You would do that? Leave our homestead?" "I would do anything for your happiness, Zora," Gabe replied, his voice rough with emotion. "Anything at all." Tears welled in Zora's eyes at the simple sincerity of his words. "I love our home," she assured him. "And I love you for being willing to consider a change for my sake, but let's not make any decisions yet. After the baby comes, we'll talk about it again." Gabe nodded, bending to kiss her with a tenderness that still made her heart race. "After the baby comes," he agreed. The baby, however, had plans of her own. 3 days later, in the middle of a crisp November night, Zora woke to the unmistakable sensation of her waters breaking. Unlike the panic that had gripped her during Hope's birth, this time she felt a strange calm. "Gabe," she whispered, shaking his shoulder gently. "It's time." He was instantly alert, pulling on his clothes and rushing to fetch Sarah, who in turn sent her eldest son running for Dr. Phillips. By the time the doctor arrived, Zora was already in the grip of strong contractions, her face pale but determined. "This one's in a hurry," Dr. Phillips observed after examining her. "Won't be long now." He was right. After just 4 hours of labor, a mere fraction of the ordeal that had been Hope's birth, Zora delivered a healthy baby girl, her lusty cries filling the room as dawn broke over Silver Creek. "Another daughter," Gabe announced, his voice thick with emotion as he gazed down at the red-faced infant the doctor had placed in his arms. "She's perfect, Zora, absolutely perfect." Exhausted but elated, Zora reached for her second child. The baby had a dusting of dark hair like Hope, but her eyes, when she briefly opened them, seemed lighter, more like Gabe's gray than Zora's deep blue. "Grace," Zora decided, looking up at her husband. "Grace Blackwood." Gabe's smile was radiant. "Grace," he repeated, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. "It suits her." Sarah, who had assisted throughout the birth, slipped from the room to give the new parents privacy and to check on Hope, who had mercifully slept through the entire event. Alone with their new daughter, Gabe and Zora marveled at the tiny features, the perfect fingers, the rosebud mouth that already seemed to hint at future smiles. 2 daughters, Gabe mused, his finger caught in Grace's surprisingly strong grip. "I'm outnumbered now." "Poor man," Zora teased weakly, though her eyes were already closing with exhaustion. Surrounded by adoring women, Gabe laughed softly, taking Grace from her arms. "Rest now," he murmured, pressing a kiss to Zora's forehead. "We'll be here when you wake." When Zora woke several hours later, it was to the sight of Gabe seated in a chair by the window, Grace cradled in one arm while Hope sat on his knee, peering curiously at her new sister. "Baby," Hope said, pointing with a chubby finger. "That's right, darlin'," Gabe confirmed. "That's your baby sister, Grace. Can you say Grace?" Hope offered, clearly satisfied with her approximation. Zora's heart felt close to bursting at the tableau they presented her husband and daughters bathed in the gentle afternoon light, a family that had seemed impossible less than 2 years ago. "Good morning, Mrs. Blackwood," Gabe greeted her, noticing she was awake. "Or afternoon, rather." "You've had quite a sleep." "I've had quite a day," Zora replied with a smile, pushing herself up against the pillows. "How is she?" "Perfect," Gabe assured her, rising to bring both children to the bedside. "Dr. Phillips says she's as healthy a baby as he's ever seen. And Hope here has been practicing being a big sister." Hope bounced excitedly on the edge of the bed, reaching for Zora. "Mama, baby." "Yes, my love," Zora agreed, drawing Hope into a one-armed embrace while Gabe placed Grace in the crook of her other arm. "We have a baby." The 4 of them remained thus for a long moment, a perfect circle of family, complete in each other. In the days that followed, Zora recovered her strength with remarkable speed. Grace proved to be an easy baby, nursing well and sleeping for blessed stretches between feedings. Hope, after an initial period of jealousy, became fascinated with her sister, bringing toys to place beside the sleeping infant and helping Zora with diaper changes by handing her cloths and pins. 2 weeks after Grace's birth, the first heavy snow of winter blanketed Silver Creek, confirming the wisdom of their decision to remain in town. The Mercers insisted they stay through the winter, refusing Gabe's offers to pay rent. "Family doesn't pay rent," John declared firmly. "And that's what you are now, family." The words affected Gabe deeply. Zora knew that, beyond his sister, who had died years before, Gabe had no family to speak of, To be so readily accepted by the Mercers was a gift he hadn't expected. As Christmas approached once again, Zora found herself reflecting on the extraordinary year that had passed. Last Christmas, she and Gabe had been new to their feelings for each other, with only hope to bind them. Now they were a family of 4, with friends and a community that accepted them without reservation. "What are you thinking about?" Gabe asked one evening, finding her at the window watching the snow fall in the lamplight of Silver Creek's Main Street. "About how much can change in a year," Zora replied, leaning back against his chest as his arms encircled her from behind. "Last Christmas I was still afraid that happiness couldn't last, that somehow all of it would be taken away. And now—" Gabe prompted, his chin resting on the top of her head. Zora turned in his arms, meeting his gaze with a smile. "Now I know that some things are built to last, our love, our family, the life we've made together." Gabe's eyes darkened with emotion. "When I found you on the church steps that day, I thought I was saving you," he said quietly. "I didn't realize you were saving me too." Zora raised her hand to his cheek, feeling the roughness of his beard against her palm. "We saved each other," she corrected gently. "And we'll go on doing so, every day, for the rest of our lives." Gabe bent to kiss her, a kiss that held all the promise of their shared future, a future neither of them could have imagined when fate first brought them together on the steps of a church that had closed its doors to a woman in need. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the town in pristine white. Inside, wrapped in each other's arms, Gabe and Zora Blackwood stood secure in the knowledge that they had found what so many search for but few truly find: a love that transcends judgment, that heals old wounds, that creates from broken pieces something whole and beautiful and new. When spring came again to the mountains, the Blackwoods made a decision. They would keep their homestead, but they would also purchase a small house on the outskirts of Silver Creek, a place where Zora could establish her dressmaking business, and the girls could eventually attend school. "The best of both worlds," Gabe declared as they stood on the porch of the modest house he had bought with the proceeds from selling part of his cattle herd. "Freedom and community, all at once." Zora, with Grace on her hip and Hope clinging to her skirts, looked up at the man who had transformed her life with a simple act of kindness on a desperate day. "It's perfect," she agreed. "Absolutely perfect." And as the years passed, as their daughters grew and were joined by a brother, Gabriel Jr., born on a summer night 3 years later, Zora often thought back to that day when she had been at her lowest, when the world had judged her harshly for the sin of loving unwisely and bearing a child alone. On one such occasion, as she watched Gabe teaching 10-year-old Hope to ride her own pony, with 7-year-old Grace and 4-year-old Gabe Jr. clamoring for their turns, Zora felt a familiar wave of gratitude wash over her. "What a beautiful family," remarked an elderly woman passing by their property. "You are truly blessed, Mrs. Blackwood." "Yes," Zora agreed, her heart full to bursting. "Truly blessed indeed." For she had learned that sometimes what the world calls sin is merely the prelude to redemption. And sometimes, a man with the courage to wrap a mother and child in his coat can mend more than the cold he can mend a heart, create a family, and build a love that outlasts all judgment.